It needs to be wiped out. Like, they keep attacking our supply wagons and everything, and they're just thieves and they're dirty stealers, and they need to be eradicated. Getting out of here. You go to fight the goblins, only to find that the goblins are actually peaceful. They're just living there by themselves. They're trying to defend themselves, and they keep getting killed by kingdom soldiers for no reason at all. The king just hates goblins. You realize that this king is a dirtbag, and he's the real villain. So you got to turn around, you got to go back to the kingdom, but the king knows that you're an enemy now. And this is what's called a social villain, because the king has already been proven to be fantastic at deception. The king tells all of his loyal citizens to look out for this group of adventurers because they are traitors and they're trying to assassinate the king. Suddenly, your homeland is completely against you. Guards will attack you on sight. Civilians aren't going to let you in their homes. It becomes a whole new game. You can't just go and kill the king, because if you do, everybody still thinks you're the bad guy and they'll kill you back. You have to find a way to convince everybody in the kingdom that the king's been lying this whole time before you can deal justice. So that's my favorite kind of twist villain. It's the social villain, where nobody believes your players when they tell you who the real villain is, and they got to be more creative instead of just going in, hacking, and slashing. The most important thing to remember for a twist villain is they're not going to be worried or scared about it unless it's already been proven that they are a powerful ally. They feel comfortable with this person because they've saved them multiple times, or they've seen the power that this ally has, and they're like, oh man, this guy's great. Like, he's awesome. What a goat. And then suddenly it turns around and it's like, no, it's a dangerous villain. And because they've already seen the power when it was on their side, they're going to fear it even more when suddenly it's turned against them. Okay, so I'm done talking about villains. We're doing pretty good on time. Now, for this is the last part. If you remember my roadmap at the beginning, this is, we're nearing the end of my presentation, and we'll open up for questions. The last thing to talk about is the boss fight. Now, like I said before, a lot of boss fights, unfortunately, are just minion fights, but the guy has more health and hits a little harder, right? We don't want that. The best kind of boss fights, some people in here might get some nostalgia, some pixelated nostalgia at the idea of defeating a dragon that gets healed by its crystal towers, and you gotta destroy the crystal towers first before you defeat the dragon. Get it? Pixelated nostalgia. Anyway, there we go. All right. But it's actually not a terrible idea. As cringy as that may seem, the idea of having to defeat a line of defenses before the villain makes for an amazing battle. Some of the best boss battles that you have in video games, or even in movies or TV shows, are ones that have multiple stages to them. You can't kill Voldemort until you destroy the Horcruxes first, right? You can't beat Thanos if he's wearing the glove. You got to steal that first. There's, when big bad villains have lines of defenses, like that horror creature that has a wave of his undead soldiers to protect him, it becomes a lot more dynamic. It's not just hit the villain. Maybe the villain is like Bowser, and they got the princess captured. And if you get too close, he'll just kill the princess. You got to find a way to rescue the princess out of harm's way and then beat the villain. There's a lot of different directions you guys can take with this. And it's really, it's up to you guys when you're DMing for your players, what kind of stakes you want to give them. So like I said, it's a multi-stage battle. Maybe you have to defeat the 2 stone wyverns guarding the gate before you can get up to the boss, right? Technically, that could also be called a filler battle, but not if the boss is behind the gate shooting fireballs at you while you're attacking the wyverns. Okay. Didn't want to look back at my slide, but I'm going to. Yes. Okay. So final thoughts about the boss battles. We don't want necessarily to kill our players. Some of us do. Some of us, yep, right there. Killing players, like DMs joke about it all the time. It's like, yes, I'm going to party wipe if they split the party, which of course you should. But making it more dangerous, making battles more fatal does not automatically make them more interesting. Like I said, death doesn't have to be the only consequence. Maybe there's a werewolf. If it's too close to you, you might be sharing some of its blood, right? That'll affect your character for the rest of its life, right? There's different kinds of consequences you can have in battle. Maybe, you absolutely still have some deaths. Um, Maybe like one character in the party ends up dying. Of course, you don't want to plan that, but as it goes along, again, don't baby them. By the time you get to the big boss battle, with all the tools that I've already shared with you in the mini battles, your players should know that this is a DM who's willing to pull the trigger, right? Not necessarily the death trigger, but the lose an arm trigger, or turn into a werewolf trigger, or you couldn't protect that one person and now they're dead trigger, right? So there's a lot of different consequences, a lot of different endings. Every boss battle does not have to be big fight, players win, woohoo, we beat another villain. The way, like we said before, a lot of boss fights are repetitive, and it's like, oh, this is just another villain that we've defeated. We've defeated all the other ones, we'll be fine, right? Maybe in the fight, one of your characters loses their arm. It's pretty damaging, but they survive. Maybe the player decides to retire that character and drop a new one for the next sessions leading forward. That character gets to live out in peace in his one-armed days, right? But that's completely up to the player. There can be different endings to a boss fight than, yeah, we beat that one. All right, let's continue hero work, right? It creates more of a story, creates more of a narrative. It becomes more engaging and more interesting for your players when death isn't the only consequence. Okay. Yeah. All right. I covered everything on that slide. So, yeah, you can use all of these tools. You can make up your own scenarios, right? Look to wars throughout history and even like classic fighting cinematic scenes. To get some inspiration, right? I mentioned a bunch of nerd stuff, a bunch of fandoms, a bunch of movies, TV shows, video games already. So take the time. It's okay to gather inspiration from other sources, right? You can look at how like the Romans used to fight. Take inspiration from that. It'll make more interesting fight scenes. Watch Pirates of the Caribbean for some interesting fight scenes, right? You got them fighting on top of like a hamster wheel. It's great. There's so many things that you can do to make combat more interesting. So it's not just a square room, a square torchlit room, kill the bad guys, don't die. Combat and thus the game as a whole can be so much more than that. And not only does it add excitement and engagement for your players, it adds to the story and it makes the game a whole lot memorable for the players. And they walk away saying, I love my DM. And that's all I have for you guys today. So thank you for listening to me talk for the last 40 minutes. Thank you. So as Andy said before, we're going to open up for questions now. So if you guys want to raise your hand, ask me any specific questions you guys have, and I will answer to the best of my ability. Go ahead. You know what? That's a fantastic question, and I do think I have a pretty good answer for that. So I didn't touch on that too much, and maybe I should have. But I mentioned before that you don't want the minion battles leading up to the boss battle. You don't want them to take too long because they get boring, right? If they're too short, then it's also boring because they just flick the minions and they die, right? We don't want that. So a good way, one thing to keep in mind is, especially during a boss fight, when it's all your players against one big bad villain, the problem that you face with that is that the players, their team, gets like 5 or 6 turns to every 1 turn for the villain, right? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So this is where you have to be creative with like the villain's abilities. Like you can give them, like I mentioned before, the horror creature that has its undead army. You can give that one villain the stone wyverns. You can add to their team, give them like 2, stone knight guardians or whatever. While or like some spellcasters in the back, give them healing crystals in the room, give them other actions, right? Give them multi-attack or a special reaction where every time they're hit from behind, they turn around and they get to attack in retaliation. I know that's not like an official thing in the rule book, but you're the DM, so you can kind of make the rules. You can kind of do what you want. Unless your players are loyalists to the book and they're annoying like that. I'm just kidding. I love you guys. But pacing, I love that you brought it up. because it is super important and it is something that's really hard to get right. This might not be the answer that we want, but a lot of it comes down to practice and time, right? The more you DM, the more you learn what pacing works. And you might have different players that prefer the puzzle solving and the role playing a little more than other players. So they're okay if it's a short combat sequence and then a good period of puzzle solving, right? It's the kind of thing where you get more comfortable with it as you DM more, and the more you play with this specific party and the specific group of players, the more you'll learn about what they like to do and the kind of pacing that they like. In general, I would say you want to, how do I put this? As far as pacing goes, a good rule of thumb, you can count the rounds that it's taking. If it's taking too long, you can, if it's like a minion battle, if it's taking too long, you can have one of the minions try to escape. First, you take an enemy out of combat, so like the combat shortens, right? One less enemy to defeat. But that enemy either escapes to flee or they escape to go deeper in the dungeon and warn the boss, right? You can do different things. It's kind of, it goes along with the don't let your enemies be stupid. Let them strategize like your players do. If they see that they're losing, allow them to flee, right? And maybe that can be detrimental to the players if they don't catch them, right? Like they're running to go tell the boss. So what this does is if the players decide we're going to catch that guy before he goes tells the boss, it'll hurry them through the dungeon faster, right? Unintentionally. They don't realize that that's what it's about. But if that's what you can do, if a match is going on too long, that's just a little trick that I use. Of course, there's tons of different ways to do it, but that would be my best tip to give on, like, if the pacing is dragging on, have some enemies try to flee or try to warn the boss. What's up? Go ahead. Yeah. If it feels like it's getting too long, it's getting too long. I don't know if that helps. I hope that, yeah. Oh, so each individual turn takes forever. Got it. All right. Mm-hmm. My first idea with that is to take your phone, set it on the table where they can all see, and they can see that there's a timer. Not for each individual turn, but for the battle itself, right? Like I was talking about, you can have timed battles where they have a certain amount of time to finish the objective. If your players are notorious for taking forever on their turns, punish them for it. Right? It's not because you hate them, but like, you can give them incentives. It's like, this sounds terrible, but I was going to say it's like training a dog. It sounds terrible, but it's like give them a reward and like a consequence system, right? I, as a DM, run an inspiration points. So not every DM does this. It's a little box on the character sheet that everybody forgets is there. But the way I run on inspiration points, different DMs do it differently. But if they do something that's quick, witty, and smart, right? If the player or the character suddenly makes a really smart decision and I'm like, wow, that was impressive, I award them with an inspiration point. And what they can do is later, if they're stuck or if the game is dragging on, I can encourage them, or they can decide to spend an inspiration point to get a hint or a clue from the DM, right? So a moment where they have a brilliant idea is rewarded with an inspiration point. So when they're all out of ideas, I can zap them with a brilliant idea then, right? So that's another idea to give. You can award with inspiration points if they're going quick, right? Give them an incentive to take their turns faster by rewarding the ones who make a quick and smart decision. Or just go the punishment route and just set a timer, right? You have this amount of time in real time to finish this battle. Otherwise, the princess deeper in the dungeon dies. Or something like that. This is something like YouTube is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful, magical thing. And there's a lot of dungeon masters that might have better advice than I do. So absolutely, like, people say, oh, don't spend all your time, watching videos. But I say you should. if you're a DM or you're playing D&D, there's so many great. A lot of things that I've been talking about are things that I've gathered and learned from other DMs in the store, DMs on YouTube that I've never met before. There's a lot of great things on the internet that will give you new ideas. So never stop gathering ideas from other people. All right. Was that I hope that gave you some stuff to work with? Awesome. All right. Next question. Is there anybody else that had something? I think we have like 5 minutes left, so probably enough time for one more question. Yeah, go ahead. Do it. Okay. Right. Yeah, I have a slide earlier that said like humiliation under the boss battle. Yeah, that's a great question. There's two ways to do it. Sometimes, yes, the dice will hate you as the DM. Sometimes the dice will just revolt. In those moments, unless it's like a big, huge, like Thanos type villain, if it's like not the big villain of the entire campaign, if it's still a boss fight, but it's like the war captain or the lieutenant or something, you're allowed to make it comedic, right? Like there's plenty of villains, like I don't know, that one guy from Phineas and Ferb that like he's an iconic villain and we love to hate it. Well, no, we don't really hate him. We love this villain because he's hilarious and he's just an absolute dork and he never gets anything right. And that's okay. If the dice are just absolutely like revolting against you and it just can't be saved, you're allowed to make it comedic. I'm going to brag about myself for a second. I was able to be a scare actor this last Halloween in the haunted corn maze. And I was the scarecrow and I was hanging with a bunch of other scarecrows in the area, right? So people come through and they didn't know which one it was. Every once in a while, you have a really perceptive person that sees your socks and they're like, oh, that one's real. And I jump out to scare them and they don't jump because they expected it. So I say, what the heck, man? This is my whole job. Like, this is what I'm trying to do. You got to do me like that? And even if I don't scare them, I make them laugh. And they're still like, all right, this guy's cool, right? It's not humiliation if you turn it comedic, right? Because sometimes that's going to happen. You're going to have flops every once in a while, just like with any job, any type of performance you're doing. There's going to be times where like where the epic boss battle just doesn't land. A way that you can save it though, you can, well, it's a good idea, especially in a boss fight, to have like those stone wyverns or the army of the undead or a caster behind him. If the boss is failing, you can change the tactic. Like I said, don't make your enemies stupid. Don't make them just attack. They can retreat. They can step back. They can reorient. They can change their strategy if what's working against if what they're doing against the players isn't working, right? The caster in back can decide to just start only healing the boss instead of attacking the players. Just only heal the boss, right? Think of like what your players would do. Think of what your players do when they're having bad rolls. If one character keeps having bad rolls, another character steps in to kind of like pick up the slack. The villains, the enemies can do that too, right? So switch it up. Allow them to switch their strategy. That's the best advice I have for that. So we are out of time. Thank you guys for listening to